Welcome to our new podcast with Katie Whitcraft and
Maria Pienaar.
called Ops or Die. All the things you needed to know about operations in business and why they're so important to function, scale, in every single thing you do. And yes, it is the unsexy part of business, but we're going to try and change that.
Yes, and just a bit about our background. So I'm Maria Pienaar. I'm a co-founder for ScaleSpark, which is our company. My background is coming from a CTO, CIO, product, business development, go-to-market roles. So I have a broad background, and now I love to see how we can enable companies not to die because of lack of operations that prevent them from scaling and saving founders time that they can focus on the business aspects of growth.
And I'm Katie Whitcraft. My background is also in operations. So I've been doing operations for close to 20 years. I started off well away from the tech industry in performing arts, and I ran a circus for 8 years, a nonprofit circus called Circus Center. Nonprofit operations and startup operations and business operations in general are pretty similar across the board. I will say resources, time, humans, money is always a concern, no matter what kind of business you're running. I ran a circus for 8 years before I came to the tech side of the board. And since then, I've been advising startups in operations, doing workshops on how to look at your operations, whether you're ready for a C-suite level operations persons or whether you just need someone to dig in and figure out what you're doing, like a director of ops. And I've worked with corporates as well, talking about their operation setup and how they can make the most of the different tasks they're trying to do. So still working in nonprofit and with startups and corporates. And now we're focused on getting the word out about why operations are so important to every single business with our new podcast, Ops or Die. All right. So we decided to start with Maria.
Yes, I mean, really, what is business operations? I think there's so many misconceptions about what operations really entails. And as I say, because I also sit on the investment side of things, an operating partner in a VC fund. This is one of the areas where I think a lot of early growth stage companies or growth stage companies don't pay enough attention to. It's the afterthought. Oh, well, we'll do it later, right? And then later starts coming up into a big blockage in growth of the company. They can't add on more customers. They can't add on more people for growth. And I've literally seen in a lot of time in the industry how the lack of the focus on business operations early enough is preventing companies from growing and scaling revenues for anywhere between 6 months to 12 months. So we definitely don't want you to get there. And again, business operations, as Katie says, I don't think it's spoken enough in especially the startup industry and the importance of that. We also work with a lot of accelerator programs, so it's hardly a topic that come up. So,
Exactly.
yay, operations people out there, we we love to talk with you and also invite you to come participate in our podcast. But let's start today just what business operations really means. And I like the metaphor. There's actually a couple of metaphors, but I like the one of a lemon stand. So imagine you have a lemon stand and you want to sell lemonade. So nothing's going to happen until you actually figure out how you're going to get the supplies for the lemonade. And then obviously you need to bring some friends in to help you sell and make the lemonade. And then you need to get the word out for people to come have your lemonade. Obviously you'll have it in a corner stand. So operations span so many different aspects of it. Obviously, as you start making money, you need to set the price. You need to figure out how count the money coming in and count the money going out. and make reasonable margins so that you can pay everyone as well as all your vendors. So it's really just a plethora of things. And I also like to see it as a car, right? You can have the most beautifully designed car, but if the engine doesn't run, go absolutely nowhere. And which is why also I think we came up with Scale Spark, because it's like putting the spark in the spark plugs of the engine, apart from making sure that all the other parts of the engine function well, that this car can go the distance and maybe go the distance as fast as you want to be.
Yeah.
So that in a nutshell is some metaphors for me around what operations really mean.
Yeah, and I like it when we use metaphors because it is hard for people to understand what all falls into operations. I don't know how many times we've been asked, both together and separately, what do you mean when you say operations? And by CEOs, by founders of startups, by people across the board and across industries, because operations is such an opaque term. And it can mean so many different things to different types of businesses and to different types of CEOs and C-suites and founders on what their operations means. And so I think those metaphors are so helpful because it really gets that sense of what do we mean when we say operations? And it really is all of those things you just said. If you don't have operations, your business isn't going to move forward. It's going to be a dead car that needs a jump or needs to go straight to the mechanics. It's not going to work out well for you. And that's why I think it's important to say here and now that if you own a business or in a business or running a business, you have some form of operations. Whether they're working as efficiently or effectively as they can is a whole different issue. But every single business has business operations that are working and doing things in the background. And one of the things we're really focused on is, okay, so how do you make those super efficient? How do you make those work for you instead of the fires all around you consuming your life and your time and your money? So as we dig into what are operations, we're going to try not to get too far into the weeds because it can be so many different things. But definitely feel free to post in the comments if you have questions. We'll try and get back to you as soon as possible, or you can reach out to us on our website directly to connect with us and talk about business operations. And if you're an ops person, just like Maria said, we love talking to you. We'd love to have you on this podcast and talk more in depth about what you've experienced and what you're doing and the problems you've seen or the solutions you've found. So like, subscribe at the end of this video, follow our YouTube page. We'll be posting these regularly, but also feel free to comment below. As we get into this, let me ask you a question, Maria. So one of the things that we've seen is these statistics around startups failing because of operational inefficiencies. According to Statista, 55% of startups that fail, it's due to operational inefficiencies. That's more than half, just straight out say that that's why they failed. So what about operations causes that failure?
So my perspective, looking at companies, as I say, we know even in the investment era, the odds are stacked against companies. 10% of companies make it, the rest don't, and they don't make it over a period of time, right? It's not that they fell within the first 12 months. So the biggest reason why most companies fail is because of a lack of product market fit, but also team plays a very strong role in that. If the team is not strategically aligned, if they don't have clear working agreements on how they collaborate, the cultural aspect of a company can sink a company faster than even just product market fit can.
Yeah.
And again, it's a statistic that's not really well known or out there or spoken about there. If there's just no efficient processes, and again, coming back to the car, if the engine doesn't run, if you can't serve your customers will get very upset with you. In this day and age where there's so much choice for customers to go elsewhere, customers will go where they feel loved and served. If your business operations is not streamlined, where it start causing frustrations, again, you can have the most beautiful UI and UX your product. If there's not quick, efficient processes in place that drive scale and answering questions from customers, they will get frustrated and go elsewhere.
Yeah.
So for me, and the cultural aspect is also the one that's a lot of the times not really looked after. And one thing that operations does as well, if you have efficient operations, not only does it set in the policies and processes of the tasks that need to be executed in making sure the business runs, but it also starts building cultural habits within the team. So as you scale the team, and a lot sometimes you see very fast growing startups, they can fail because they grow too fast, and they fail if they grow too fast because the operations is not in place. How business operations also, as you bring on more people, start getting them into their work habits of how you as a team work together and all the agreements, working agreements on your team culture as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's missed the most, the misconception about the fact that operations is just the admin. It's just the administration. It's just back office work. It's just accounting or hiring someone and getting their paperwork done or, making sure that people have their logins to different platforms. But the true feel of operations really affects so much more because if you don't have clear standard operating procedures or workflows of how things are done, there's no clear sense of expectations. And so if someone does something wrong or it doesn't get moved down the chain, and someone else on the team is frustrated because they can't do their job because they're blocked by this other thing, that's all in how your operations are set up and how the infrastructure is set up and how the agreements about how you work are set up. Because when you don't have those things and you don't have that common understanding of we do this and then this and then this, you get to this place where everyone's just, it's the Wild West and they do whatever they want. And then it's not ever the same. And they're working off this idea that they don't have any idea what's going on. And so that strategy that you use around the rest of your business really needs to be brought into and really is that operations piece. It's those agreements about how work goes, as well as all of those integrated pieces of how this infrastructure talks to that infrastructure, how this piece goes to this piece, goes to this piece. It's those workflows that really make the difference and can really affect culture and how happy your team is and how effective they are.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen also there's also the other part of it that I've seen companies where early they have the clear agreements in place, the processes are flowing well, all the way from understanding where the finances is to how they onboard people, the policies are in place, and there's good support structures and also product design structures in place. And then there's a change in team. And when there's a change in team coming in, the one part that's normally forgotten is training on policies and procedures.
Yeah.
And getting the new team members or the new team up to speed, especially if there's a change on executive level, and if that executive level people coming in do not appreciate the value of operations as a strategic value, I've actually seen companies go backward. That
Yeah.
it starts breaking because the new people are not focused on that. They're not taking over the aspects of operations that they should. They're not incrementally keeping on improving on the foundation that's been laid. A lot of the time the assumption is, oh, the previous people didn't do a good job. Well, it doesn't mean that the processes are broken. And I think that that is also a failure as new leadership teams come in to
Yeah.
really align them around the strategic thinking of why certain things were done. And yes, by all means, if it's a process that used to be inefficient and not working anymore, it needs to be reassessed, but reassessed with everyone who's got a touch point in that. But yeah, I mean, I've seen the adverse side as well as especially leadership teams come in, everything falls apart. And then again, you get frustrated customers and you get threats that customers may leave, and you don't want to get into that fire if you can avoid it.
Yeah. And that's really true. Those changes in ha the upper divisions of leadership that happen so often in companies across the board, not just startups, but also corporations and things like that. If that transfer of knowledge isn't made and that transfer of culture
Yeah.
isn't made correctly and appropriately, that's a huge fail point. And I've had it so many times where I've been in charge of operations for a company, and I've been leaving, and it's okay. Let's download Katie's brain because we don't know how to run. And it's this really hard process. So you need to set that up from the beginning, the documentation, as well as that infrastructure and culture and things like that, and the training programs of those changeovers, which is all operations. How do you transfer leadership? How do you transfer, even down to how do you transfer? I know this is a personal pet peeve for you, Maria. How do you transfer the admin levels of access to platforms?
Yeah.
Because that's a big deal too.
Yeah, and I mean also again, if there's inefficient operations, especially around spend management, again, I've seen so many times the process is not there or gets forgotten as teams change. And suddenly, common one that I see on the technology side is, oh, the security cert's expired, and then suddenly someone calls and say, hey, your website is not up or
Yeah.
your product is down, and it's something that could have been prevented, and now everyone has to scrounge around and see what the problem is. So documentation is key. And I think one part of it as well, when you look at it, is people think it's adding on to their daily workflows. And that is a challenge. The minute that it's something that's seen as an additional task on top of already a overloaded workflow for teams, then yes, they're going to ignore it. If it's something that can be automated as fast as possible, it just becomes then an oversight function. So where they may have had to spend 4 or 5 hours a week on a specific operational task because it's too manual or inefficient, now that drops down to less than half an hour a week. So it's really efficient operations give busy teams time back.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest value that we bring, is helping teams get that valuable time back, though, so they can focus more on operations and product and hiring people that help drive sales and revenues and focus on that. There's only really three things that drive the company. It's time, the time you spend on things. It's are you saving money? And I've seen overspend in business tool software of 30 to 50%. I know the standard in the industry is about 30%. I've seen cloud expenditure, especially in early growth stages, where there's 75% overspend. Where companies
Oh,
need $1,500 a month on AWS or Google or cloud because
that
they ran
kills
up.
me. That kills me. Because think about that as your burn rate and how much runway you have and how much that overspend is taking from those aspects of it as a startup or any business. And you're running through your revenue, you're running through your runway at a speed that is insurmountable almost. And so just fixing that little piece of it is huge.
Yeah. And I mean, and from that perspective, yeah, you may only need to spend $150 a month on your cloud environment. So it's ops is not a siloed things, and ops also help how not to get silos in a company, because the minute you have silos, you have an increased potential for conflict in teams, and ops is really the part that can really, as I say, make the business run as smoothly as possible. Because smooth businesses can grow and scale. And yes, there's also the philosophy, oh, we are SaaS business, people just put things on credit cards, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Up to a point, you can onboard users, but again, it's all about your internal business functions, on how that part of the engine runs. It's
Yeah.
running the business, not running the product, but all these things ties in together.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I want to talk a little bit about in this conversation about what operations is, because I think it helps people to kind of diagnose that part of it, is Michael Porter's model. His Michael Porter's model on operations. It's all the way back from 1985, which I know would have made me 3 years old, and I'm sure a lot of people watching this may not have been born at that point. But it's good to look back at it because it is really helpful to see how much operations influences your business, but not only your business, your competitive advantages and your revenue. So one of the things about this model is you're seeing those top level pieces which go across all the things you're doing below them. And operations is so integral to everything you're doing. You're seeing human resources management, you're seeing technology development, you're seeing procurement, and the operations is affecting everything in those. And so when you're looking at this model, the thing to understand is that it's a core value of transformation. That's what operations is. It is the thing that changes your raw materials, your inputs, your ideas into those products and services that are your business. All of that transformation, that's coming from how your operations are functioning within the business, because you're taking it from, all of these inputs, and the processes, the operations are churning out what will be your core product, your core services, as well as how those services are dealt with after purchase. And so processes, systems, all of those pieces of operations are integral to everything your business is doing. And so looking at that model can be really helpful in understanding what operations are. It is not just HR. It is not just tech stack. It is not just accounting. It is how all of those things affect going from all of the inputs and ideas and raw materials, etc., into the end product and beyond. And so that's a really core component that I think people forget about is that it's not just anything. It can be so many different pieces and parts along the way. And so I think that's a model that I really like to use and to look at when we're talking about these things and what exactly operations is. So going back to that engine, right? Like this is the thing that makes it go.
And I think one part of it is like in any, the Porter model also help you build the flywheel around your operations. Google, Amazon is well known for being an extremely efficient company because they focus on building flywheels, get the engine going, and the engine perpetually grows and scales. But it's also reporting back and gaining back metrics
Yeah.
on measuring whether things are working or not, and then helping to bring that into a integrated vision and board of really where things are. It's not just the KPIs around revenues, it's also are the inefficiencies creeping it. So it gives you that feedback loop as well all the time on whether things are running efficiently or not. And I can remember with one of the customers I was working on, the part of the time that took up initially, and that's why I said this is where you get into the manual operations trap, that you so focused on other things, and you want to be where you can start spending 50% of your time, 60 to 100 hours, just gathering data. And the faster that you can help automate that, and that's really where you start seeing the strategic value coming in.
Exactly. Exactly. Contributing to that competitive advantage, that revenue growth, that scalability factor. All of those things are going to be contributed to or taken away from based on this unsexy part of business. The not fun part. So let's talk about real world. We obviously both have a lot of experiences in operations. So let's talk about like a company that you know that did really well and have scaled. You mentioned Amazon, and one of a company that you have worked with or know, or maybe that you've just read about that failed due to operations
Yeah.
problems.
And again, and also companies out there that's looking at VC funding and investment, the one thing we always look at is this founding team going to help us get a return on our investment, over a certain period in time. And obviously, one of the things that we really look at is not just the strategic aspects of how they go and acquire customers, but it's also what's the cost of the customer acquisition. Inefficient operations can increase that, right? As I say, inefficient operations can prevent them from bringing on more customers and team members. And when there's a lack in revenue and a slowdown in revenue, guess what? They likely will not get the follow-on investments, because when they got the investment initially, it was like, these are the KPIs that you claim, the revenue targets you claim you're going to make. And if you don't have efficient operations in place, you're going to miss those revenue targets, which means you're missing the opportunity for potential follow-on rounds. Now, there are companies that scaled effectively organically. The best way to fund your company is through revenues. So yeah, I've just seen aspects, as I say, where companies were prevented from scaling revenues for 6 months to 12 months because they didn't start focusing on this early enough. And quite rightfully, getting a company started or through the initial growth phase, you do need to you should rather spend your time focusing on areas where there's sales, and then also start outsourcing some of the tasks that you are doing to others who bring in the expertise that can help build these foundations for you. And again, you can see with companies that have got this in place, where the team did bring in the experience, start automating first. I mean, you speak as well. People operations is one of the things from compliance, especially here in the US, can cost you huge penalties.
Oh yeah. Yes. If you that's a piece of it, right? Knowing what you don't know. And where people get in trouble a lot is in that kind of HR compliance world. Here, being in California, it's one of the most protective states of employees, and there's a lot of rules and laws around how you classify employees, how you work with employees, the different things you have to do as an employer for employees, but also how you classify contractors and how you work with those people. So there's lots of rules and regulations out there, and you need to know that you don't know them sometimes, and figure out how you're going to deal with that factor. Not when you get the fine, trust me, that's not a good place to be. There are records with the EDD and with the state of California if you violated them, and that's true across many states, that they're going to keep a record of employees who fail certain tests. So you want to know those beforehand, and you want to accept the fact that you don't need to know everything. I think one of the problems we see with founders a lot, and one of the things I've experienced in companies I've worked with, is that founders, as experts in their field, have a sense that they should be able to handle all the things in a business. And that's just not effective. It's not a good way to handle things. There's things that you're not going to be an expert at, and it's good to use your resources to find those places where you can delegate. There's a quote that I love that's on our website as well, by Leander Connie, who says, I think it says, do what you do best and delegate all else. And I love that idea because you are an expert at this thing. Don't think that means that you have to be an expert at all things across the board. Delegate, turn it over to other people. I've seen so many startups that I've worked with, that I've advised, who feel like operations is just a nice to have. Like, oh no, we don't have time or we don't have resources to put towards operations. And it's like, that's great. How is that going to feel when you didn't pregame by delegating some of these operational things out, and you all of a sudden are hit with thousands, tens of thousands, and sometimes hundreds of thousands of fines or lawsuits for not following the rules of employment, or the rules of, how you have to, if you get hit by the IRS because you didn't keep your accounting well and you get audited, that's not going to be great. So it's really pre-gaming those things and delegating it out to the right resources.
And it's also, when you are a company that may be operating in multiple markets now these days, with a lot of SaaS companies, they can scale globally, but these, it just complicates your financial operations. And again, if you don't bring in the right expertise up front to plan the structures properly, these will help prevent you from sending payments. It will prevent you from receiving payments in. And that's just, and again, looking at well-run companies, they do bring in those foundational strategic foundations for operations in place by thinking about what it is that and how it will help them scale. And then also the metrics to understand when bottlenecks are starting to happen.
Yeah.
Inefficient companies are the ones who's like just, as I say, flying by the seat of your pants, and we'll do it later. We find to manually do it because we don't have the people that necessarily can focus on that.
Yeah.
And then maybe, let's bring in an operations person, where that may not be the right person to bring in, where you could have delegated it somewhere else with expertise to come in, and what you need at that stage is maybe more salespeople. And it really depends from company to company. Obviously, if you're manufacturing hardware, your logistics supply chain management is quite key, and especially now in this current global macroeconomic environment with really messed up supply chains and tariffs. And this is where operations can help you strategically pivot and do the shifts where you need to go. But again, you need that expertise, and you may not need to hire that expertise internally to start with. You can always bring external expertise in, and then help put that up as a foundation and training ground as you scale further. But it is operations is a very strategic function. It is not just, most people just think it's finances and, as you say, HR, but it just entails so much more. And that's why, I think these conversations are important for growth companies who's looking at expanding, and we don't see a lot of that out there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a real reason why a lot of companies fail. And that can hinge on a lot of these factors. And so let's get down to brass tacks. Operations. We've talked a lot about different pieces of it and talked a lot about why it's so important. What is it? It's systems and processes. It's financial management. It's tech integration, tech stack. It's HR and culture. It's all of those things and a lot of pieces in between, including communication, which a lot of times goes back to the tech stack. It's workflows, again, back to processes and systems. It's all of those pieces. That is what operations is. So when I said earlier that every business has some form of business operations, I meant it, because you can't have a business without some piece of this, right? But the way I see it, and especially in what we do at ScaleSpark, is operations is one whole ecosystem, not pieces. It is the whole thing and how it works together. And this is one place I think that I differ from the overall idea of operations out there in the world today. Is we have managed HR services, we have managed tech stack services, we have managed accounting services. We have all these pieces that are managed and that you can outsource, but they're not really seeing it as one whole being of how your company runs. And in a world that we now live in where technology is automating and we're bringing in generative AI to companies a lot, and we're bringing in AI and ML a lot, and things that are organically kind of doing their own work, seeing it as pieces and parts that don't talk to each other is really detrimental as well. And so the way I look at us operations is everything has to communicate with the other thing. Siloing information, siloing data is really going to cut down your efficiency, cut down your prospects for scalability, cut down the effectiveness of your organization. And so I think when we're talking about operations, well, it is what I listed. It's also how it works together and how it functions within your company.
Yeah. And as I say, it's really the aspect, because you're bringing all these aspects together, and communication is between these entities and systems is so key. Because again, one of the other regions, and this is from Gallup research, companies fail, I think it's the number 3 reason, is that teams, cannot communicate across cultural language divides.
Yeah.
And what operations does, it puts common language and definitions in place about how things need to be done to make the company run effectively. So it is a holistic approach. It's not just, as you say, siloed. The one thing you don't want is siloed organizations, because that causes a lot of other conflicts. And obviously, as you scale and grow, likely silos will start creeping in, but it is something to don't over design it, but design it to be efficient. And that's why it's good to always look and review these processes. But once the foundation is set up, literally can give you back about 80% of your time, which you're spending now gathering data from different aspects and asking people to go and run and gather data, right? And AI, I know there's a lot of conversation about, agentic AI. Yes, it can help improve productivity and efficiencies. But again, if your company has not been trained on how to apply it properly, if you put AI, an agent, on a bad process, you are just going to exacerbate the pain exponentially.
Yeah. I mean, it's that common problem, bad data in, bad data out, right? And that's the same thing with processes, automation, and bringing in agentic AI or other AI tools into a poorly formulated process. If you do that, it's going to exponentially create bad outcomes for the company, because if the process isn't strong and isn't creating positive outcomes without automation and AI tools on top of it, it's not going to magically fix it if you put those tools into it. So you really have to look at that holistic viewpoint of make a good process, make sure it's clean, make sure the data going into that process is clean, and then use those tools, use those automations to create that exponential factor of growth instead of this crazy chaos on the other end, right?
And that's why I say, where there's bad operations, there's always chaos. There's also the fire of the day to fight. It's exhausting, and That is why we would like to have these conversations and invite more operations people into the conversation as well, is how do you deal with streamlining this constantly, but yet still keeping it as a strategic function within the company as well. And we know where there's effective operations. I mean, you can look at Amazon, you can look at Meta, right? The reason those companies were able to get to the scale was because of very effective and efficient operations. So it is a strategic function. It is not just, oh, here's something to do the task, and oh, let's just give it to people to do the tasks.
Yeah.
You've just got to start seeing operations as a strategic function and how it helps you grow and scale. And it can help you get there faster. Efficient car engines get you there faster. Sometimes you need the long haul truck. If the truck again may not be as fast, it will get you the distance. And again, from even updating your shareholders and investors, efficient operations build credibility.
Yeah.
Shows that there's a team that is effectively working together and running the company in a very capital efficient way. And you can't do that without effective operations.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. I think one of the things that's really important to focus is scaling the right way. And a lot of companies talk about scaling and growth, and they're just like, let's just get to the next level. And that's great, and they're not wrong, but how do you get to that level? It's picking the right vehicle to get you there, making sure those infrastructure points are really solid and that they're not going to crumble as soon as they're weight tested, if you will. That all of those pieces and parts are really working at top efficiency, and that you're seeing that whole system unity, because the structure is always stronger when it's connected, when it's not just a single pillar off by itself, but when those pillars are connected. I've also designed sets, and so building is near and dear to my heart. And when you're building something for structure, you not only have supports, but you have cross connections to enhance that support and the dynamic load ability. And so the idea is the same in business. You need all of those pieces to work together to truly support what's going on in the top and how fast it's going forward. Otherwise, it will start to deteriorate. So that scaling right idea, right, is really looking at the infrastructure and looking at those systems that are strong, that are connected, that work together well, and reinforced, and then moving forward. And then you're going to be supported the whole way instead of losing wheels on the highway, if you will.
And we will be obviously continue the different conversations around different aspects of business operations. But I think it was important just to, I think, start defining what business operations all entails. And as I say, it is not always easy to get your head around that. But that's where we want to go with these conversations.
Exactly. So Ops and Die, your new podcast for everything operations related, which, as we just learned, can mean a lot of different things. So we'll be having a lot of visits from different people, interviewing and talking to people in the world of different sides of operations, different pieces of operations. I think our next podcast is focused on intellectual property, with a special guest that we'll announce soon. And then all of those pieces, but also talking to people from the startup world, people who are founders or work in startups, to get that real true perspective of what's happening, what they've experienced and how they've experienced. But starting with this foundation that we're all talking the same language, as we talked about being important to operations, it's also important here. So if you have a comment, you want to see a certain topic, please hit us up. But let's continue the conversation.
And as I say, it's not only just if you're a startup. This is also very relevant to any small, medium enterprises out there and
Yeah.
businesses. So if there are areas where you feel overwhelmed by all the manual things that you're doing and spending too much time of us, please reach out. Definitely talk to us, leave comments. We'd love to hear from you.
And finally, like and subscribe, and we will see you again soon. Thank you so much. This is Katie and
Maria.